Bill Platt here, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another video. As I've said before, I'm not too worried about video quality on these. I'm using like a $10 camera, and at a later point I will be upgrading to the HD camera. I do have the HD camera available, but I'm not using it yet until I get resituated in my new house, which will be in the next month or two. So until then, I'm not going to worry about the video quality. People can complain about it if they want, but it's about the content. And so I've been working with writers since 2001, and over the years I've trained writers on how to become more proficient as writers, how to produce more um, uh, uh, written works, how to promote themselves online. So I've got a lot of experience doing this, and it goes back almost 2 decades. Well, 17 years, almost 2 decades, right? So on this channel, I'm going to be sharing with you what I've learned over the years. And Bill Platt for Authors is the name of the channel. But if you go to billplattforauthors.com, you can join my mailing list, and I do send out pretty much every day other tips that can help writers in their journey. So in this particular video, I'm going to talk a little bit about fiction writing. And if you've tuned into the other videos, you might have noticed me say, I don't write fiction. I'm a nonfiction writer. However, there's a lot that I can accomplish, or I can add for fiction writers. I can actually help fiction writers, definitely with promotion, and I understand the basic structures. I do training on fiction, but I do it with other people. So they bring their specialty in and talk to my audiences. So I've got over 5,000 authors who already pay attention to me, and they're on my mailing lists, and I send them information on a regular basis. And the other folks I work with, they specialize in the fiction writing. And in 2014, several people asked me. At the time, there were people producing fiction plots that people could purchase and use as the foundation of their stories. And several of my customers contacted me and said, hey, is that something you could do for us as well? So I thought about it, and I eventually did do something, and I created a website called fictionplots.com. So you can go to fictionplots.com, and it's a membership website, and it's a paid membership website, just so that you know before you get there. But within that website, I approached it from a slightly different angle. Instead of doing 10 mystery plots that covered 10 different stories, or 10 romance plots that covered 10 different romance stories, I hired writers to create those stories for me, those fiction plots for me. And I've had as many as 8 working for me at a particular time. I've got about 4 of them working for me right now. And they go through and they create fiction plots based on the outline I gave them to create those. And so each story has a short introduction of what the overall story is, who the characters are, the challenges that the characters are going to face, their objectives, and a 10-chapter outline of the particular story. But that's not what makes it truly special. In my mind, what makes it special is I know that fiction authors are much better off in the long run if they focus on telling the series. So rather than focusing on a one-off book, they are better off to carry that story through several books. And then, because 90% of the challenge we face as writers is earning the trust of readers. So when people find one of our stories and they fall in love with the story we've told, then they start looking for other books by that author. And if you do one-off fiction stories, then there's nothing else to go to. They may have fallen in love with you as a writer, but they also fell in love with your characters and the basic storyline, the story premise that you're carrying through within your fiction storytelling. And so if you have a one-off book with particular characters, and then you go to a new book, a completely different format, different characters, everything else, people, they've learned to trust you as a writer, but they haven't yet learned to trust the story you're telling. So if you can write in a series of books with the same characters, when people fall in love, then they have other books which they can pull up that are the same characters, the same basic storyline, and they can follow that through several books. So when I hired my writers, I didn't tell them, I told them we're not going to do one-off stories. And we do have some one-off stories in the website. But the primary focus is on the series. And so there are book series in there, plot series of 3 books, 5 books, 7 books, 10 books. There's even a couple of them in there with 20 books. So you get up to 20 plots with the same set of characters. And as the story progresses, each one of them is a standalone plot. And for a lot of writers, the plot, having access to plots is very helpful to them because it gives them the ability to produce a lot faster. They don't have to think, they don't have to brainstorm a storyline to tell their readers. They can go in and grab a plot and adjust that plot to fit their personal style and their personal taste, and then start creating that story. And it's a real time saver. And in the last video, I was talking about the thing that when I did the 72-hour nonfiction books, 90% of adding speed to your production is knowing where you're going to take your story before you sit down to write. So you need to have at least an outline, a sketch outline of where you want the story to go before you sit down to actually start writing that story. And a lot of people say, well, if you write fast, you can't write good. And that's just not true. If you're a good writer, I produce 700 to 1,000 words an hour. And so I really don't need that much time, at most 40 hours to create a full-length book if I'm doing 1,000 words an hour. And I can do that with nonfiction easily because I've got a lot of experience doing this. Been doing it for 17 years, right? Now, fiction writers, they can also do it too if they know where the story is going. And the important thing here is if you only have a basic sketch of the story in your brain, then you'll type 500 words or whatever, and then you have to stop and think. Okay, where is the story going from here? And this is what we refer to as pantsing it. So, flying by the seat of your pants and telling a story. So, pantsers is what we call that. And so, pantsers, they type out 500 words and then they have to stop and think. Well, what am I going to do next in the story? And where am I going to go next? And how am I going to handle this particular situation? And what happens is they might type up to 500 words in 4, 5, 6 minutes, and then they have to stop and think for 30 minutes. And then once they have the idea where they're going next, then they type another 500 words, and 10 minutes later they're like, oh no, where do I go next? So 30 minutes of thinking again. So it takes forever to create a story if you're pantsing the story. However, if you have a general idea of where you want to go with your story, you can just zip right through it. And that's how I do it. And I create an outline. 90% of my time is figuring out what story I'm going to tell and thinking the story through and figuring out, okay, this is the story I'm telling, this is the order I'm going to tell it, and these are the fine points that I need to cover when I'm telling that story. And then when I sit down to write, it's just zoom right through it. It takes no time at all to write it because I came prepared. And if you approach fiction in the same way, if you come prepared, then it doesn't take nearly as long to write the story. And that's where the plots come in. If you have a good working plot that you can customize and make your own, then it's really easy to fly through that story. And on the fictionplots.com website, I do have like romance and science fiction and fantasy and a few mystery and historical and a variety of different types of stories there. And a lot of my customers have told me that they will take two plots in two different, completely different genres and blend them together into one particular plot, into one particular story. And others will take a series of 10, and the one lady was telling me this series of 10 here was a great series, but what you talked about in plot number 6 was just so outstanding that I extracted that one plot and turned that into a series of 5 books. Okay? So she was able to take a simple storyline and pull out so much more than what the writer put into it that she was able to complete a entire book series based on that one plot. And when I say that I've got 10 chapter outlines there, the average plot within the Fiction Plots website is 2,500 to 3,000 words in length. So there's a lot of material there for you to feed off of when you're developing your stories. You can blend two plots. You can even blend two genres even to create a new storyline for your book. And the basic plot, people say, well, what if somebody else is using this plot? Well, why? What's the problem here? You are going to change the names of the characters. You're going to change the settings. You're going to add your own flavor to the plot that you're working with. And even if we all sat down, if 500 of us sat down with the exact same plot as our starting point, we would end with totally different books. If you look at the hero's journey, for example, the hero's journey goes back. It goes back probably about 4,000 years in literature. And if you look at Matrix and Star Wars and Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, all of them have the hero's journey as their platform, as their foundation. But none of those stories are anywhere remotely similar. They are similar only in that we've got a reluctant hero, and he's got challenges. He's been called to a great challenge that's bigger than him, and at first he rejected the invite to take his rightful place as the hero of the story, and then something terrible happens which kind of forces him into battle, and then during the course of his experience he overcomes challenges and goes on to defeat the great evil that has befallen the world around him. So as you can see, I don't write fiction, but I understand a lot of the basic premises behind the fiction story. And so I hired the right people. All of my writers are published fiction authors, and they come to me for extra money to develop these plots. And I spend quite a bit of money every month having these plots developed for the website. And at this time there are over 300 plots within the fictionplots.com website. And you can come along and you can pick those up and start writing. But even if 400 or 500 of us sat down with the exact same plot, we would not come out with the exact same story. And so if you take the plot and you change the names of the characters, and you change the setting, and you tweak each individual point of the story, like maybe you change the lead character from a painter to a writer, or you change him from a painter to an electrician, right? So now you've changed the basic foundation of the story, so therefore when you move forward, it's a completely different story. There's no way that two of you are going to be able to create the same story from the same plot. And then when you take multiple plots and blend them together into one, or you take a single plot and extract it out into 5, then you have the foundation for great storytelling, and you don't have to think about your characters. You don't have to think about the rise and fall of the story, because everything's laid out for you in advance. So with nonfiction, I want to sit down with a outline and know what story I'm going to tell, how I'm going to deliver that, and the fine points that I need to cover within the context of my book. With the fiction, it's just a slight variation, in that you're dealing with a imaginative story as opposed to a factual story. And the fictionplots.com website brings that capability to you. And there you can either go in for a monthly plan, a quarterly plan, or an annual plan, and it's perfect for those who every November do the NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month challenge. When you sit down to write that, if you don't have your plot outlined before you even begin, then it's going to be harder to write your entire novel in 30 days. However, if you come prepared with a pre-written plot that you've taken and customized to your own needs, when you sit down to write, you can write it in 30 days because you're entering the challenge well prepared. You know exactly where you're going to go with your story, so therefore you can write it more quickly. And people who tell you that you cannot write, people who, the way they phrase it, they say, anybody who writes fast can't write well. That's BS. And I know it's BS because I write well and I write fast. And I know people who write well and they write fast. And I know people who produce fiction novels in 30 days. Leanne Dobbs, a friend of mine, she writes a cozy mystery. She writes her novel in 3 weeks. And then she spends the final week doing book blurbs and book covers and pre-promoting her book ahead of launch. And then as soon as she launches, she's off writing the next book. We're talking about full-length cozy mystery novels. I've known her for years. Great lady. Awesome lady. Okay? And she writes good books. She's been top of Amazon several times, top 100 in Amazon. She's been in the USA Today bestseller list. She's been in the New York Times bestseller list. Her books are good, and her books sell, and her people love her books. And she writes them fast. She's doing a 40 to 45,000 word novel in 3 weeks writing time. And then she's got 1 week devoted to promoting that title. So at her writing speed, she is producing roughly 15,000 words a week. And she's been doing this for going on 4 to 5 years. And every single month she's got a new book ready for release. So it can be done with fiction. And it all starts with, do you know where you're going with your story? If you have a plot in front of you, then you can get there faster. You can spend less time writing because you can spend less time thinking. Instead of flying by the seat of your pants and writing 500 words, then having to stop and think about where your story is going, figure out where your story is going before you sit down to write. And because you know where your story is going, you can just sit down and just zip right through it. You know exactly where you're going. You don't have to stop and think, because you know exactly where the story is going before you sit down to write. And that's why plots are helpful for nonfiction or for fiction authors. Like I said, I've got plenty of writers working for me. They're all published authors themselves. They've all published novels themselves. And they write for me. So I don't have to be a fiction writer in order to help you with your fiction. Because fictionplots.com is chock full of pre-written plots that you can use to develop your own stories. Plots written by fiction professionals that you can use to develop your stories, available through my website. So if you go to fictionplots.com, the first page when you get there is going basically a description thing. And then click on the link for the membership site and learn about it. And just to give you an idea, one of the things I've done on there is the very first plot that we put onto the site is available on the sales page. You can read the entire plot on the sales page. And that kind of gives you a strong understanding of what type of plot you're going to find within the website. So I'm going to go ahead and close this video. My name is Bill Platt, and right here in front of me, Bill Platt for Authors. If you go to BillPlattForAuthors.com, you can sign up for my mailing list. If you click the subscribe button down below, YouTube will let you know when I have new videos available. And if you ever want access to great fiction plots, go to fictionplots.com. I have over 300 plots available in a variety of genres, and you can start writing books, writing your stories right away. And honestly, I believe it's one of the best investments, especially for somebody who's going to participate in NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which happens in November of every year. So do check that out, and I'll be happy to help you if you have questions. My email is on the sales page. You can send me questions and I'll answer them. Most questions are answered the same day, unless I'm away from the computer. So thank you very much. My name is Bill Platt. Until next time, have a great one.